Hey there, and welcome to what is hopefully the last compression video that you're going to need to watch. Compression can be pretty confusing, and when I was first learning, it took me a year or two before I fully understood it, and even then it was kind of fuzzy for a little bit. I know a lot of people struggle with compression because it is really confusing at first when you're getting used to it, and so this whole video, I'm just going to explain compression in a really clear and concise manner, and hopefully by the end of it, you'll be not a compression master, but at least understand what all the controls do so you can start to make your own compression decisions. So if that sounds good, please make sure you like and subscribe because it really helps the channel to grow, and I'm going to get started. Also, make sure you watch to the end of the video because I'm going to talk through my favorite compressor settings to have as a default, kind of as a template. So when you open up your compressor, it's ready to go with some really good settings already. At a fundamental level, compression is a tool to help you even out volume differences in a performance. So it's going to make your loud stuff a little quieter, your quiet stuff a little louder. So you're dealing with a nice even audio source instead of something bouncing up and down all over the place. So I've got a compressor pulled up here. It's the stock compressor in Logic, but a lot of these controls are on compressors all over the place. So what you can learn here, you can transfer to the Pro Tools compressor or Waves compressors or the compressor on your mixing console. All of those things, all of these parameters like threshold and ratio, they're going to be kind of global, interchangeable between compressors. The first and one of the most important parameters of a compressor is the threshold. And the threshold basically tells you at what volume is something going to happen. So in other words, anything that exceeds the threshold, something's going to happen to it. It's going to be compressed. And anything below the threshold, don't worry about it, basically. The threshold is basically telling the compressor at what volume should it start compressing. So a really high threshold, like 0 decibels, is not going to compress much because this input level has to go all the way up to 0 before it gets compressed. If we pull this down to somewhere like -12, we're more likely to have the compressor engage because this input level only needs to get up to -12 before it's compressed. So as a general rule of thumb, the more you pull down this threshold, the more compression you're going to get, the more your input will be compressed. That leads us into our next control, which is the ratio. The ratio tells the compressor how much to compress when the threshold is exceeded. So your audio is coming in, and then it passes the threshold at a certain point. In our instance, it's -12. And then we can say turn it down or reduce the gain at a ratio of 2:1. As you increase the ratio, you're going to get more compression, more gain reduction when the threshold is exceeded. So a good application for a high ratio would be like a singer that suddenly gets really loud. You'd want to set that threshold around where their regular volume is and then set a high ratio so that when they get loud, it turns them down by a large amount. Reduces their gain is another way of saying it. If you get nothing else from the video, learning the relationship between threshold and ratio is by far one of the most important because that's really how you dial in the large amount of compression sound that you hear. And from there, these other parameters like knee, attack, and release, they're going to help you kind of shape the sound of the compression and the response. But it's important at first to understand threshold and ratio. Threshold is where is it going to happen? Ratio is how much is going to happen. And by using those two things, you can dial in a lot of different compression results. This next parameter here, makeup, could be makeup gain or level, depending on what kind of compressor you're using. This is a way to add back sound after you've compressed. So if you're consistently compressing like 4 to 5 decibels out of your sound, you're lowering the overall volume of that sound by 4 to 5 decibels. The makeup gain is the part that brings your lower stuff louder because you've already tamed your loud stuff, made it a little quieter, and then you want to bring up the whole level of everything to kind of sit in that pocket together. This next control is called attack, and this really has an effect on how the compressor sounds. So if you've ever heard people say like, that sounds really compressed, or I can hear the compression, that could be the way that the attack is set. The concept of attack confused me for even longer than the general concept of compression, but attack is basically how long does it take the compressor to start. So you have your threshold, your audio exceeds the threshold, compressor's like, okay, something's gonna happen now, we're gonna turn it down by the set ratio. But attack says you have to wait 20 milliseconds before you grab that. The technical term is transient. When your audio peaks, like a snare has a hit, that's a transient, that initial onset of the audio. And a fast attack, say something like 5 or 10 milliseconds, not a lot of that initial transient is going to get through before it's compressed. This is good for some instances when you want the compressor to engage right away and really keep your sound controlled. But as you increase this attack, you're going to get more and more of that initial punch that happens before the compressor hits. So for drums especially, it's important to have a slow attack because you want a little bit of that snap to come through the compressor before it grabs. You also want to be careful with attack because if you set it too fast, you're going to absolutely just choke the life out of your source, and you don't want to do that either. So I found a good healthy range for the attack is somewhere between 10 milliseconds, and I'll go as high as 20 or 30 milliseconds depending on what I'm compressing. So far we have threshold, which is at what level the compression is going to occur, ratio, which is how much compression is going to occur, makeup gain, which allows you to add volume back after you've reduced it for a more balanced feel. Finally, there's attack, which is how long the compressor takes to engage when something goes over the threshold. That leads us into our final parameter, which is release. And release is after the sound goes back below the threshold, how long does it take the compressor to relax, basically. I adjust release, usually the least amount. A good rule of thumb with release is you want to set it fast enough so that your next transient, whatever is coming next, so if it's a bass guitar, between hits, between notes, you want that compressor to fully relax and release before the next attack, because otherwise you're just gonna start more and more compression and it's never gonna like let go. So as an example, I've got a bass guitar track here and I'm gonna go through each control, show you what it does and how it's affecting the compression. So our bass is hitting around -12, so I'm going to set the threshold at -12 and start to pull it down until I'm getting some compression. Ratio here, I'm going to put it down to something really gentle like 1.5 to 1. It's not going to compress much even when we pull this way down. But if I start to pull this up, maybe like 5 to 1, we're going to get a lot of compression when it exceeds the threshold. And so this is really helpful for dialing in. Say we really want our bass to stay around -12, but those times it's peaking up to -9 are really bothering us. We can set something maybe like -15 with a high ratio. So it's not going to engage all the time, but it will engage when the bass gets those few extra loud hits. And then the next parameter we want to adjust is our makeup gain. And my rule of thumb with makeup gain is always look at the average that I'm compressing and then increase the makeup gain by that amount. So if we're suddenly compressing kind of around -4 or -5, then we can push this up to, we'll say 4. And what that basically does is if you're mixing, it's going to help your mix stay at the same volume because you're not slowly pushing levels up or pulling them down. But it'll also, if you're going to A/B, like with compression and without compression, it helps make that easier to hear because if your compressor is increasing the volume or decreasing the volume, it's harder to tell what it's actually doing than if it's matched with the original uncompressed volume. So it feels a little louder, but it's actually those quiet parts that are coming up and being louder. I switched over to drums so that you can hear the attack better because I had a hard time hearing it on the bass, so I pulled it over to drums. Specifically listen to the kick and the snare here, and I'm going to adjust the attack so that we can get more and less of that snap coming through. So here's almost no attack. You can feel the drums almost got pushed back, like out of the way, because there's no attack, there's no onset, there's no power really. But as I open this up, you're gonna hear that initial spike start to come through. Here's fast attack. Pulls that out. Slow attack. Puts that initial spike back in there. Release is a little simpler. Just watch out for it not being too fast, because if it's too fast, you get this weird kind of distortion. And then if it's too slow, it's not gonna reset in time between hits, between times that it goes over the threshold. So here's a little too fast. Kind of just distorts, it kind of messes up the quality a little bit. So right here's a good spot because it's fully returning back to 0 before the next hit happens. And then if I go too slow, you actually have lost some attack because the compressor has not let go. It's still compressing like -5 or 6 when the next hit happens, and it kind of just gets freaked out. So that's not what you want either. For release, there's really that sweet spot where it's not going away too fast, but it is going away before the next attack. That's really where you want to land with release. The only other parameter to talk about is knee. And knee, if you look at a graph right here, here's an example of the compression. So you have it coming up. This is before the threshold, which is just 1 to 1. And then you can see right here where the threshold is, there's kind of a bend, a knee. And depending on, not all compressors have this setting, but depending on where your knee is set, it's gonna decide how kind of rounded, how gentle it is, or is it very defined, like this is the threshold. And so you can mess with knee. I really just set it kind of medium, but depending on if you need it to feel a little smoother, you can turn that knee up and it'll kind of round it off, ease it into the compression. Or if you want it to feel more aggressive, a little more hard, you can put the knee at 0, so it's a very defined entrance to the compression. I hope that made some sense. If you're at this point in the video, drop a comment, let me know. Thanks for sticking around. Real quick, I'm gonna run through my favorite settings to start off with on compression. If you like to save templates or save user defaults, I'd really recommend doing this. I like my ratio at 3 to 1. That's a really good balanced spot. It's gentle enough, not too intense. Set your threshold around -18. If you've gain staged properly, then you'll get a little bit of compression from -18, but not too much. I set my makeup gain around 1 or 2. I usually adjust this afterwards, but a good spot is about 1 or 2. If you've gain staged properly, meaning your input is coming in between -18 and -12, then this threshold ratio and makeup will all work together and give you nice gentle compression out of the gate. From there, I like my attack at 18 milliseconds because usually I want the transients of whatever I'm compressing to come through a little bit. And then a nice fast release around 50 milliseconds is pleasing to my ear. This might change if you're using a different style compressor, but overall, I think this is a great place to start and will get you out of the gate and up and running quicker. And I'll drop those settings down in the comments if you want to look at them, take your time and copy them, that kind of thing. That wraps up the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you still have questions about compression or need me to go into more depth, please let me know down in the comments and I'll be happy to elaborate. Thank you so much for watching and I hope this was helpful.